let's get my bias out of the way. Fantastic Four is the property that I've wanted the MCU to adapt for the longest. This is one that holds a very special place in my heart. This is probably the first non-Spider-Man Marvel comic that I read as a kid. And this was because at the age of 7 or 8, the new Fantastic Four movie was coming out. My dad, being a huge collector of comic books, loved going to the comic book store, and he took me for my birthday that year, and I got to pick out a handful of comics. And one of the ones I chose was this compendium of Fantastic Four comics. They were all in black and white. It was so they could put a bunch of issues for really cheap, and it was a great way to just read and be introduced to a bunch of new comics. So I got that for my birthday and fell in love with it. And I think it was because it reminded me of The Incredibles. It was because it was these new characters with these cool powers. And as a kid, it just enamored me. And getting to then see that movie, and a movie that I admittedly know was not very good, but also at the time, being in second or third grade, really enjoyed it for what it was. Then growing up, I wanted to see this property that I held dear done right by the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So that's what I was really seeking. And this is to also just acknowledge the fact that as somebody who loves the Fantastic Four and has read probably a lot more than maybe the average comic book fan has read, because Fantastic Four is definitely not everyone's favorite comic series. I've read quite a lot of Fantastic Four and will also fully admit not a lot of it is very good. Fantastic Four is probably one of the harder comic books to make interesting while reading, and also I think just an extremely challenging one to do right on the big screen. So I was hoping Marvel could have that. And the one run that I remember really getting energized for Fantastic Four, I read it much later in life in college. I think it was 2018. I read the Jonathan Hickman run that I think started in 2009 and went to 2011, 2012. And this story is so focused on, and that storyline by Hickman is so focused on Reed Richards, which when the series is done right, it's because Reed Richards is at the forefront and he is an extremely interesting character to play. So I walked into this movie kind of hoping we'd get some of those storylines, we'd get some of those beats. And that is what I got to some degree. And it's also kind of what left me cold about this movie was more of, we got the Fantastic Four that I remember reading as a kid. And what level of excitement that brings me, because there's quite a bit that this movie does. And also, I think where some of the natural shortcomings come with this movie. So let's talk about Fantastic Four First Steps and what it is trying to achieve and what it achieves from most successful to least successful. I've wrote this all down. The thing that I think this movie does the most successfully, which we'll jump into and explore, is it tells a completely standalone story that has no baggage or anything that comes before it in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think it makes it very welcoming to new people. I think it also successfully introduces an entirely different dimension/universe within the greater Marvel Cinematic Universe. Again, something that we'll talk about, but I think the way that this movie does it, also largely with the production design, is very smart, and that's really well realized in this movie. I think this movie also pays homage to Jack Kirby, which this movie is quite literally dedicated to Jack Kirby, who is the illustrator for Marvel in the 1960s. And I think it is able to bring that visual language that he so brought to Marvel and is like the basis of all Marvel comics. Like, he is, when you think of these characters, a lot of the times you're thinking of Jack Kirby illustrations. So I think this movie also is able to adapt his comic book visual language. Now, here's where I think the film has some elements that are mixed to negative in the sense of how they establish it, which one of them, I think this film struggles to basically pinpoint the new leader of Avengers Doomsday moving forward with Mr. Fantastic, which is to say there's some issues with the Reed Richards character that I think is going to be a struggle with them, especially if Reed Richards is going to be a character moving forward heavily in the MCU. And also, I think this movie is very much trying to tease audiences of the critical importance of these characters in this next stage of the MCU. And it's a issue where I think the film gets weaker and weaker. So you're initially intrigued, and by the end, I think there's some real shortcomings of this film that is going to be very interesting to see how they reckon with come Avengers Doomsday, which the Fantastic Four and the character of Doctor Doom are supposed to be heavy parts of that movie. And this is going to be a heavy Fantastic Four lore story in Doomsday, with the fact that Doctor Doom will appear in that movie. But let's just take this kind of case by case. And I think it will actually be helpful to talk about this film in a largely linear fashion, due to the fact that I think this movie is one that starts off strongest and then by the end has some issues of fizzling out. With that said, before we jump into that, I just want to say to everyone watching this, thank you so much. I hope you subscribe, and also follow me on social media, TikTok, Instagram at Ben Talks Film. Message me and let me know that you're coming from this channel. I have a Superman digital code that I've been trying to get rid of. I own all these movies on digital. So message me and just let me know that you're interested in it, and I'll message you back. So now let's jump into Fantastic Four First Steps, and let's talk about what I found to be the most positive aspect of this movie, where I was admittedly having a very positive reaction for the first 30 minutes of this movie. And I think what it is the world building that this movie establishes right at the get-go. And it's the ability to have this retro future come to life. And it's very inspired by this techno realism that I really enjoy. It reminds me of the Jetsons. It reminds me of Tomorrowland at Disneyland. It's all of that. It looks like a comic book brought to life. It is willing to engage with that. And it is also just directly pulling from comic book mythology, covers, and images. So the fact that this movie is recreating that visual language up front makes it very exciting for somebody who's loved Fantastic Four. And that is so much due to the great production design of this movie, which I do think is great. And I think it's some of the best Marvel has had. All of these locations look really cool, especially this futurized New York, but it also has this retro 1960s feel. It's also uplifted by Michael Giacchino's score in this movie that I think is quite good. And instantly it sets you in this world, and it makes you see this kind of different reality than what we are used to and in our understanding of the 1960s, which was quite a turbulent time in our history and also seemingly in the history of the MCU. This is one where it's just like, oh no, this feels closer to a utopia where there is a real sincerity, where people believe in something. They believe in the Fantastic Four. The costumes look silly, which adds a level to the fun. The way people talk about the Fantastic Four, it is something that could be idolized, and it is so just tonally different from everything that we've been seeing from the MCU and the current state of it, that I really just enjoyed that. And then we're introduced to these characters in this kind of fun montage. It reminded me a lot of Zack Snyder's Watchmen, which is essentially this monologue that goes through this Ed Sullivan-like show, where it's basically telling us the history of the Fantastic Four to an audience. It's this like 5-minute scene. You get to see it all. You get to see the origin stories. You get to see iconic covers like the first Fantastic Four issue recreated in that. Again, just as somebody who loves this stuff, I was geeking out during this. And this is where everything just starts to come together, and like character interactions are different, how they're communicating. The MCU is so quip heavy, and it's so making fun of the fourth wall in many ways, or in other ways just like winking at the audience and letting them know that they're in the joke. This movie is not that. They don't have that winking tone that Robert Downey Jr. had really established within the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Iron Man. This plays it far more incredibly sincere, which is interesting to note because I just did a superhero review for a movie that does this exact same thing, and I have to admit it does it better in Superman. So it is just interesting that these two projects that are, I think, largely trying to do the same thing have this tone and sincerity, and I think people are going to really like that. And again, I think it is a fresh flavor within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It does also draw my point while watching this movie where I'm just like, oh, I just saw a film do this a little bit better than you did, and not even a little bit, a lot better than you did. And yet, as the film goes along and the stakes become more amplified, I do think the movie struggles to adjust these heroes and give them new layers. The fracture starts the exact second Galactus appears in this movie and the Silver Surfer enters this story. I don't know if there's any real moments of levity for the rest of the film. And I know there has been so much criticism recently that Marvel has been playing it incredibly jokey. That has always been a complaint with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where it's like, hey, you have world-ending stakes, take that seriously. And this movie, I think this is like too much the other way, where I'm like, hey, like, want to have fun in this movie? I don't want this to be overly serious, which I just think it is. I think it's a little too moody. I think everyone's just a little bit like flat of a tone. And that was something that I think really became noticeable, where I think these actors start with a natural charisma that I think kind of just like flat. It's the performance styles all just become to feel the same, and they're all kind of through the same emotional story act. And I liked their entire dynamic. I want to make that clear. Like, I liked all 4 of these actors who played these Fantastic Four heroes in their role. I don't think anyone is really miscast in this movie, but I did find it weird that I was like, okay, playing one note here, and it's melancholic. And again, it's not to say that that's bad, or that this film cannot have stakes, or that this film can take itself more seriously. Like, I think that is a good approach. I just think there is a level of fun. And if you wanted to have a story that should feel a little bit more fun and a little bit more pop and have a little bit more humor and silliness, I think the Fantastic Four, especially going by this 1960 definition and understanding of that Jack Kirby, Stan Lee created back then, I think that's one that actually, like, that type of tone could have really worked in your favor. Instead, it's kind of just a disaster movie where everyone is having to prepare for a disaster as it's coming, as it's warned by the Herald's Silver Surfer. And let's kind of address the big performance of this movie, the performance that has to work the most for this movie to be successful, which is Pedro Pascal, Reed Richards, the smartest man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And we get some traits, and I think there are some key traits about Reed Richards that they carry through in this movie, and I think some of them is very well equipped to do. He's a family man. He plays it completely straight, and he's so smart that he becomes a burden to himself and everyone else. I think he's able to play the protector role very well, this family man oriented, very well. It's the same type of style of performance that he's like to do in The Last of Us as Joel, or he's asked to do in The Mandalorian. It's weird that he's been typecast into this role, when I think the far more compelling part of Pedro Pascal as an actor is his charisma and that just confidence that he can have. I think of his performance in Game of Thrones, or I think of a comedic performance that he does that I thought was incredibly underrated, with The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, where you're just like, oh, this guy gets it. He has this comedic sensibility, and he has such a natural, big persona that really fills the screen. I kind of think this film needed to rely more on the natural charisma and not this well put together, calm, collected kind of guy. And again, I know that's like with the Reed Richards, like, I don't think it's a mischaracterization to do this, but it is a struggle that this movie has. And I think what could have also helped is, again, they play the sincerity part of it well. They play that he is a family figure in this movie, that he is the leader of this group, and that he is the protector of Earth and his family. And I also think they could have played more with the smartness, because you do get some of those scenes in this movie where the Reed Richards is essentially like the math on risk assessment and what that means, what it would cost, what that sacrifice worth it. Maybe he's the only one who can truly make that decision due to his intellect. I think what this movie could have done, and I also understand why they didn't do it, is I think what is most interesting about Reed Richards in the comics, and adds a lot of personality to him, is the burden of his intellect and what that does to him, but also what it does to everyone around him. I wouldn't describe him necessarily as an egomaniac in comics. I do think that his smartness makes him so alert on everything else and what's going on in the world, that kind of his focus, and he knows that he has that burden of intelligence and how that can affect everyone else around him. I think giving him that element in this movie, which this movie does hit on that a few times. There is a really good sequence where Pedro Pascal's character of Reed Richards is talking to Sue Storm, and essentially they're talking about, like, if Galactus wanted us to leave us alone, like, he said this is his request, and if we do it, he'll spare Earth. This is a price, and this is a fair price, and we're not going to get a much better deal than this. And I don't have another solution that will get us out of that. When he's direct like that, and he's thinking so unattached from his emotions, and it's purely logic, I think that makes for something very compelling. And then as he has this push and pull between his intelligence and his passion and his ethos, like, all of that is in play. When those three are kind of fighting each other, I think it's a far more interesting performance. Again, he has that in this movie, but I wanted to feel the burden of a genius a little bit more. I think of the fact that the other person who was suggested for this movie, and that apparently Marvel had been chasing after to get, was someone like Adam Driver, which, again, I think he'd have been a really good Mr. Fantastic. I understand why he didn't want to take this role, but he does have that gruffness around him, and that, whatever you want to call it, if you want to call it ego, if you want to call it like absolute, like exactly what somebody doesn't want to hear, and just says it in such a direct way. I think Adam Driver has that ability as an actor. Again, that's not to say that Pedro doesn't, but I think that's Adam Driver's strong suit, where I think Pedro Pascal in this movie is good in this movie, but you aren't getting the whole package that is Pedro Pascal and what he does so best as an actor. So that was kind of my issue with it, where it's like, I wanted more of his incredibly charismatic presence in this film. The one performance that I do think is like, I thought it was kind of a knockout performance, and I loved it actually, was Vanessa Kirby in this film as Sue Storm. I think she's knockout in this movie. I think she's so good as Sue Storm in this movie. And what I love about this is that I think in many ways that she is the hero of this movie. This film puts her maternal strength as a requirement of this storyline. It also mixes in the compassion and empathy mixed with the rage of the situation going on. I think she gets really great heroic moments in this film. She is wrestling with the hardest decisions, and she is the person that inspires. She is the person who is in many ways not just leading the Fantastic Four, as her husband just has an inability at sometimes to connect with people, but she is also the one that is having everybody believe in this image of what the Fantastic Four stands for. I think it's a really impressive role. This is by far my favorite version of Sue Storm that we've gotten, which, again, very low bar, but I just think she's knocked out great in this movie. Everyone else in this movie I find generally pretty good. I liked how the Thing looks in this movie. He's like sixth most important character in this movie, like is one of the Fantastic Four. He just gets the least to do of this cast, and I would say Galactus is maybe more important than him as well. Quinn is really good in this movie. I really liked his Johnny Storm. I like that what they did with this, where usually they just kind of portray him as the hotshot pilot type character who then the Human Torch. I like that they're like, no, this character is also very smart, and he's a problem solver, and what he's doing, what he's realizing, he plays like huge fundamental role in the second act leading up to the third act, especially with the Silver Surfer character that I just thought was really good. And I thought Joseph Quinn was just game for it. Again, wanted a little bit more of that natural charisma from him, and I think I wanted some of those one lines. He has them throughout the film. It's also the issue of just like really funny. Like he has a few like, that's kind of clever, but nothing like that made me laugh, which again, kind of could have used more of his natural humor coming through. The one performance that just didn't work for me, and this was like a huge issue, and again, this is kind of my issues with the film lie. I thought Julia Garner as Silver Surfer was just really bad. Like, I couldn't believe how bad it was. And I think there's so many things that went wrongly with it. One, I think it's just a badly written character. I don't think this character really gets much to do in this film. The CGI is like bad and like ugly to look at. just a nothing performance. Silver Surfer really just, I didn't think has any real purpose to serve in this movie. And they're trying to give her something to do with the Torch character. And again, just didn't care for it. This performance was just completely out of whack for me. And just, I don't think there was any real writing to it, which also should just kind of us to Galactus, which visually, I think Galactus looks incredibly cool in this movie. And of course, there's the scenes that we've seen in the trailer where Galactus is like coming down to Earth, how massive he is. Thought it was cool. I thought the voice actor was really good as Galactus here. And just all of that really worked. And there's elements of it, Galactus storyline, that really work. How they defeat Galactus, I was like, okay, lame, like just don't really care. Again, it's kind of some of the issues that I have with the Silver Surfer character, where I'm just like, okay, get it. I don't think the third act really sticks the landing. It's also a movie just really devoid of action. Like, there's a lot of adventure in this movie, and there's a lot of sci-fi in this movie. This movie doesn't actually have like a ton of action that you would expect for a superhero movie. Again, I think they're more interesting as space adventurers and scientists, like first and foremost. So I am glad that they focused on that. Also means that the film can be a little dry at times where you're just like, I kind of wish there is like a little bit more going on the screen and seeing these powers used and get to see all 4 different types of these powers in different scenes or to fight crime. I don't really get a ton of that. And I wanted a little bit more of that. This movie, not really a ton of that in the third act, which kind of left me disappointed with that. What I did like about it, though, is actually leading into the second act before Galactus arrives to Earth. And that involves so much of the Fantastic Four basically having to get Earth on the same page and work as one to protect themselves from Galactus. And again, it's this idea of we're Earth's protectors and Mr. Fantastic is going to protect us, but he needs everybody pitching in. Everyone has to sacrifice. Everyone has to do it. And what I enjoyed about this is Earth come together, rally around the Fantastic Four, that they do believe in these heroes, what it's the sacrifice that they're making for them. I found that to be a pretty cool representation of the Fantastic Four. There's one element of it that regards power and maintaining energy that I thought was just really well done. And Vanessa Kirby gets like big scene in this where she's basically, this is why we have to do it. This is why we're doing what we're doing. Even if you guys don't fully understand it, this is our plan. This is what we're fighting for. We're not going to abandon you, but we need your help. I thought that was very stirring comic book stuff and really clever comic book writing. So ultimately, I think this movie is good. I think this movie has enough going for it that I can definitely recommend it and say that I had fun with this movie, with this vibe. At the same time, I also think some of the issues with adapting Fantastic Four, how hard it is to tell the Reed Richards storyline, how all these characters in many ways just kind of sidelined. Like Thing getting sidelined is pretty traditional for Fantastic Four comics. I just kind of wish that there was like a level to it. And again, I don't know if that's the action. I don't know if it's just like I wanted the Galactus third act to be something a little bit more. And I don't know if it's just that I wanted a little bit more from the Reed Richards character, not necessarily the performance. All I know is that when the movie ended, I was like, this is good. I wish it was great because the seeds of greatness are present within this film, but it just doesn't hit it fully. It feels a little underdeveloped. It feels undergrown, I guess you could say, into that seed metaphor. But regardless, good movie, would recommend it. And I do think it's good that Marvel is essentially on an 18-month break before Avengers Doomsday. I am very worried that actress who plays Mystique from the early X-Men films just did like an interview today, I think at Comic-Con, and she's like, I might be done filming my scenes. We don't have a script finished, so I don't actually know. That's a little worrisome, and I know this is like a trait that Marvel has done where they put movies into development without a finished script, and I'm like, well, sometimes you get stuff that feels a little half-baked, and sometimes I think it really works to your benefit. And other times I'm like, maybe you should have a script going into and like clear trajectory for these actors to kind of know what beats to hit. I think it is the push and pull of Marvel, and I think it is all in display for Fantastic Four. First Steps, still a good movie, still one that I enjoyed. I would recommend it 3.5 out of 5 stars. So thank you to everyone who watched this video. Again, follow me on Instagram at Ben Talks Film. Again, message me for this Superman digital code. And yeah, thank you all for watching. And I'll have a review coming out for Happy Gilmore 2 and the body horror film starring Dave Franco and Allison Brie called Together. So thank you so much, and make sure to subscribe for more.